Thanks so much for sticking with us throughout the video. A big thumbs up to you for that, much appreciated. And what's also appreciated is all the comments that we have gotten on our engine issues that we don't know how to figure out ourselves.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, guys. This is incredible.
Tons of stuff. I've actually printed off a bunch of the comments so we can kind of go through those. I must admit, some of this stuff is a little bit beyond me, and I think most of it's beyond you.
Definitely. Absolutely.
So forgive our ignorance on some of this stuff, but we're going to try at the end of this video here, we figured we'd tack on a little bit of trial and error in terms of figuring out this idle issue and maybe some other engine stuff, because, again, we got these great comments. Yeah. So, shall we start at the top and see what everyone has to say?
Absolutely.
So Dan and Jenny had to say that the hard starting issue was probably caused due to advanced timing. So I have a timing gun, I think. So if I do, then we'll check the timing, and maybe that will help us to get the starting issue taken care of. And in terms of the idle issue, a bunch of comments on that. Bobby commented that I should check the coolant temperature sensor, clean the IAC, which I believe means idle air control. He says the distributor is a really common oil leak. We had all that smoke issue coming from the exhaust, and he says mine also has a transmission leak that dripped on the exhaust. So, that's a good consensus there. He says the idle should drop to 700 or 800 RPM when warm, although another person says that with an automatic it's more like 1200, so I'll look for that kind of range. And he mentions as well that the EGR system probably needs a good cleaning. I'm pretty sure I can figure out where the EGR valve is and remove that and clean it. Somebody else mentions that also, so we'll definitely do that one. And Al's Hack Shack, who has commented on my videos for a long time, hello Al, mentions that he has a 16 valve. He says definitely look to find any vacuum hose leaks around the intake. I have done that, but I'm going to check again. He said a mouse nibbled his and it was idling super high, so I'll definitely recheck that. I think one way to check that is to spray like carb cleaner kind of all around there, and if it's absorbed, if it's sucked in by any leaking vacuum hoses, that will change the idle. I'm pretty sure that's a reasonable way to try that, so I might try that.
Okay.
He says as well that the ISC valve, which again I think is that idle speed control valve on the 16 valve, it could be faulty, but he says that he thinks it's a sealed unit. He had to replace his. So that's a question I'd have for anybody who may or may not know. I don't know what it looks like or really where it is. Is this something that's sealed that we can't repair and we have to, or test and we have to replace it? I'm lost on that one. He also mentions the EGR. He says it's always choked up, so I'll try cleaning that. He says, given the exhaust leak, the lambda sensor, which I didn't know what that was, but that's a fancy way of saying O2 sensor. Thanks, Al.
We Googled that.
Yeah, we Googled that. He says that might be an issue, so I'd like to check that. He mentions MAF sensor, not just the sensor, but the wiring connection too. Coolant temperature sensor, which Bobby also mentioned. And he's the guy who mentions that the auto revs a little higher. He says that it idles at about 1200 rather than the 900 that the manual idles at. So my question to you, Al or anyone else, is can I check those sensors? Is there a way for me to easily test them with like a multimeter or something like that? Or do I just have to replace them and hope for the best? I don't know. Moving on. David says, just a thought regarding the idle speed. I noticed she has air conditioning and wondered if it could be associated with the ECU anticipating a parasitic load from the AC. I thought probably not because I've seen this issue on plenty of Suzuki, some with AC and some without. However, and I should have written this person's name down, I apologize that I didn't, but somebody replied to his comment saying that that they have noticed that that they've got one vehicle with AC, one without, and they've noticed the problem is more prevalent on the vehicle with AC. So maybe there is something to that. Our AC is totally disconnected, like the hoses that go to it are disconnected, but the compressor is still connected to the fan belt. So I don't know if that would make any difference. Does anybody know? And then finally, this one's really interesting. This is from Gypsony2. He says the high idle is a feature. There is a hose that runs 2 switches, red and blue. If you pinch the right hose, I don't know which color, then the idle will drop. I believe it's a feature to heat the engine up faster. So that's really interesting, and I'd like to try that on camera if we can actually find those red and blue switches that he refers to. So, you know, let's have a look at that. The reason we're outside doing this little intro is because once we start it up, it's going to smoke terribly. I think we've discovered that unfortunately we have a blown head gasket.
Oh dear.
It's just horrible. We're getting dense, acrid white smoke, which I'm almost positive indicates a really blown head gasket. So we'll ask for your advice on that one too, but I'm pretty sure the advice will be replace your head gasket, because yes, indeed, it is blown, which sucks. But life goes on. But at least we can try to adjust the idle in anticipation of fixing the head gasket.
Yes.
Yeah. So I said a mouthful. Shall we move on and open the hood and figure out what we can figure out?
Yes.
Try some of this stuff?
I'm really interested to see this stuff. Yeah.
Right on. Thanks again, guys.
Yeah.
Well, let's give it a go.
Yes. Thanks, guys. Here we go.
There goes Judy trying to open the hood from the driver's side of the vehicle when the hood latch is actually on the passenger side of the vehicle in the glove box. She did it. Weird place for a hood opening handle. All right, well, let's try to figure out an idle issue. So as mentioned, the AC is totally disconnected. Judy's having a hell of a time here.
I can't even get the hood open, let alone know she fixes it.
As I was mentioning, the AC is disconnected. The hoses that go to wherever they go to are not hooked up, but the compressor itself is hooked up. So I don't know if that's part of the issue. I really don't know how to test that. Is there something I disconnect, electrical that I disconnect, or do I just take the fan belt off? Would that make any difference? I really have no idea what to do there. But other than that, was mentioned idle air control valve. I don't know what that is. I'm wondering if maybe that's it. It has this electrical plug going to it. Is that possibly an idle air control valve? And if so, is it something I can clean, or is it something I just have to replace? Please help. Or is that an idle air control? No. I think that's a throttle position sensor, because you can adjust it. I think that's a throttle position sensor. I wish I knew more stuff. Anyway, we know where the O2 sensor is, so that's an easy one to change if we need to change it. I don't know how to test it. If somebody can tell me that would be great. But again, I will do my Google research. I won't rely on you guys for everything. Distributor oil leak we can check some of this stuff inside where it's warmer when we go in, but while we're out here, we should look for those switches, those blue and red switches that were mentioned. Do you see anything blue or red around here, my dear?
There's a red something.
And that's it would be a vacuum line, I think. I don't know what I'm doing. That's the problem. What's this thing? I don't know. It has a vacuum line going to it, and it looks like it would switch things, but I don't know what it is.
Maybe it's underneath, inside that? Is there a cap to pop off?
No. Well, I'm not too sure. I know there's a blue thing there, but that's just electrical going to it. No, those are electrical. Oh, yeah, red and blue. Oh, hang on. And these have hoses going to them. And that something is broken. I wonder if that's the problem. These, I think you're right. Look, red and blue switches, hoses, and something's broken. It's probably supposed to look exactly like that.
Okay.
So maybe that's an issue. I wonder if we pinch this hose shut, if it will change the idle. That's what the guy was suggesting, my dear.
Ooh, okay.
I wonder. Should we try it? I'll get some pliers and you could start it up, and then we'll see if it changes anything.
Okay.
And then maybe the kind people can see all of the awful smelly smoke that comes out.
Yes.
It doesn't take very long to start smoking, that's for sure. Okay, start it up, my dear. You notice how many RPM it's at? $2,500? That's actually not terrible for a cold day. I'm gonna pinch it now, my dear. Well, it made no difference at all, unfortunately. It makes no difference at all. Neither one. Well, it should happen instantly. Is it already smoking? Well, I wish that that was the fix, but I don't think it is, because pinching the hoses off does nothing, so maybe that broken thing doesn't mean anything either. But it's already starting to smoke, everybody. Look at this. Stink. If you could smell the stink, I'm telling you, it's horrible. And it's really whitish, bluish, gross, acrid, smelly smoke, which I think means that our head gasket is blown. So that didn't work. What is the other thing we have to try? Where did you put that sheet of paper, my dear? Check the timing. Oh yeah, I have to look for my timing gun. But the other thing was just to look for vacuum leaks. So I guess if I just pinch off random hoses, you know, I should be able to notice if there's any change in the idle. And I'm not noticing anything from doing any of them. This one. Nothing. None of them seem to do any. Those are all spark plug wires, my dear. I don't think any of them are doing anything. And I don't hear any vacuum leaks at all. Well, I think we'll check the timing now to see about that starting issue, and then we'll take it inside and check the other things that people said. I wish that this thing would have worked.
So close.
Yeah, darn it.
Did you pinch all of them?
Yeah, I pinched all of them. All right. In the shop where it's toasty and warm.
Yes. That helps.
Judy's displaying her Balmer Fab, her Balmer's Workshop
Yes.
shirt. So, one of the things suggested in terms of that oil leak that was leaking onto the exhaust and creating so much stink and smoke was that the distributor may be leaking. And if we look, the distributor is leaking, or has been leaking. You can see that it's nice and clean up here. So Judy's going to do some learning at the same time. This is a distributor. Okay. The distributor distributes the spark to the different spark plugs in the at the right time, so that they're in the correct firing order, so that the engine runs correctly.
Gotcha.
So these leads all go to the spark plugs. And inside of this cap is a rotor, which rotates and spins around and connects at the correct times with different terminals inside of the cap, which then sends signals or sends sparks through the spark plug wires to the spark plugs.
Okay.
But that gets its rotational force is provided via the cam. Okay, so the cam is a shaft within the engine, which basically acts as the brain of the engine. Tells the engine how to behave. It sets up the valve timing, the valve lift and duration is based on that.
Okay.
So that's basically the brain of the engine in an old-fashioned car. Mm-hmm. So because it's connected to the cam, of course the cam is bathed in oil, like everything else inside the motor. Mm-hmm. And this is a kind of an external component, so it has to have a seal to prevent oil from coming out where it goes from internal to external, so to say. And this has been leaking, and apparently that's a real issue with these vehicles. So if you look down by where that connection point, mm-hmm. You can see that as we go further down from the cap, it gets greasier and greasier and greasier and greasier. Yeah. And as we go down onto the bell housing, which is the the front of the transmission down there, yeah, it's absolutely caked in grease and oil. So that's almost certainly because this distributor has been dripping down onto it, and then onto the exhaust directly beneath it. Right. So I think that person was correct. I should probably, is the paper handy? Mm-hmm. Let's give this person some credit. Who was it that gave us this distributor advice, my dear?
Distributor advice.
So it was Bobby who had mentioned that the distributor is a very common oil leak on these. His also had a transmission leak dripped on the exhaust. So thank you, Bobby. You were correct.
Yes.
It certainly is a distributor oil leak, and it's leaking directly onto the exhaust. Maybe we have a transmission leak as well, but we're going to be replacing the transmission, so that's irrelevant. But thank you so much for that. Bobby mentioned about the distributor leak, and then there were a couple of other folks who mentioned about how to clean it up and fix it. I think he actually replied and was the one who gave the most info. But anyway, for all of you who did mention that, thank you so much. There's one thing that we'll definitely approach and fix very shortly with some, I think he said use silicone rather than the O-ring. So we'll do that.
Okay.
Maybe Judy will do a little learning on that one.
Absolutely.
Do that work herself. There's one thing figured out. What's the next thing we wanted to look at under the hood here?
Timing thing.
Timing. We wanted to check the timing. I can't find my timing gun, so I will look for that, and we'll check the timing in another episode. One of the other things, though, was the EGR. So
it needs a good cleaning, they say.
Needs a good cleaning. EGR and IAC are things that I want to identify on this engine. EGR, if I remember correctly, is something which is usually just off the exhaust manifold. Is that right? I think maybe that is the EGR right there. I think that's the EGR. It's attached to, well, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the intake manifold. Is the exhaust on the other side? Yes. I still feel like that might be the EGR, because what it is it recirculates exhaust gases into the intake. So I think that is the EGR, but we'll just double check that on the computer. If it is, then it looks like it's pretty easy to pull off. It's just two 12mm bolts and a couple of hoses, so we could pull that off and clean it up today if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So let's go do a quick Google check and see if we can figure out if that is the EGR and if that is the IAC. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have run out of time for this, our day today.
Yes.
But we will be back shortly to finish this up. I think that I correctly identify the IAC and the EGR, and I believe I have also come up with ways to test them through a little bit of Google research. So that's the next step. Join us for that.